so I want to acknowledge my co-authors, Samia Arusha, who are leading this work. The Rise of the Robot Waiter, expanding the job characteristic model in age automation. But first, I'm going to give you a background. My PhD is in information systems from a business school. So I'm from a business school. I left the business school. I went to school of information, where I thought I would be a business school professor in school of information, and I would do stuff for people at Ross Business School, and that would be my thing. Turns out I didn't. I spent a lot of time integrating myself. So in the beginning, when I was a PhD student, I was heavily involved in the Academy of Management, Informs. You ever heard of Informs before? Association of Information Systems. That was my PhD community as I came up. I got a job in business school, didn't quite like it. I moved to SI. And then I started getting involved in CHI, CSCW, where I was applying my same concepts, but to a different community, much more design focused. And I was pretty happy there. And then I decided to do autonomous vehicles and got involved in robots. I was tapped to join the university's first autonomous systems committee. And there I met other people involved in robotics and at the Robotic Institute. And so I started doing HRI stuff. And I moved now and I do a lot of stuff in the IEEE community. So I sort of span all three of those communities, which can be kind of exhausting. Spend a lot of time going back and forth. But it does mean that when you get my presentation, you're not quite sure what you're going to get. It could be a business school presentation, it could be engineering, human factors, it could be a computer science. So I'll give you a warning in that, right? Probably something different. So I have 2 appointments. I'm a post positive. If you don't know what that is, that's probably a good thing. So don't worry about it. I have an appointment in 2 places, School of Information and Robotics. I play 2 separate roles. So in the School of Information, I'm the guy that does experiments, randomized studies, interventions, heavy statistics. Right? I'm the quote unquote hard science person. And then when I go to robotics, I'm the person who studies people. So I'm like the soft science person. So it depends upon where I go, I wear 2 different hats in those places. So it's pretty interesting. So we'll go here to service robots. I like to define things. At Michigan, we separate AI from robotics in the sense that a robot has to have a physical body. So I tend to say a robot is some type of physical enactment of AI. And so that's sort of a loose definition of it. And in this case, for service robots, is thinking about robots that help humans perform some sort of service tasks. The standard business school motivation, it's a hot topic, but it's a growing market. I get a lot of conversations about people, about robots. Do you think they're going to be around? What role they're going to play? Well, they are taking off faster than ever, right? The market is increasing. I say maybe 5 years ago, you wouldn't even estimate that things would be this fast. That being the case, there are some benefits. You see a lot about the benefits of robots, in particular service robots, communication, data analysis, productivity. These are also your standard. I want to sell you a service robot. Here's why they're good, right? What you don't hear less about are the challenges. A big challenge is fear of job loss. People don't like working with something they think is going to replace their job. Frustration, a loss of autonomy, depersonalization, surveillance. All right, surveillance is like the other side of the data analysis coin. And competition, people sometimes feel like they're competing with the robot, right? So now it takes us back to the big picture. I get asked to do interviews all the time, and people say, "Are robots going to take all the jobs?" Blah 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 blah. And the answer to that question is no. Turns out that humans are pretty useful, right? So going forward, you can have a human-robot hybrid workforce, all right? So that goes the idea of let's move away from the fear of robots and all the problems to one where we can build some synergy between humans and robots collaboration. So for me, the big picture of the research question is, and this topic that I'm exploring, how can we provide quality work for employees collaborating with robots, ensuring that their work remains engaging, meaningful, and satisfying while promoting human-robot synergy in the workplace, right? Now, you might say, why restaurants? Turns out restaurants are incredibly interesting places, right? One, labor is a huge component of the cost of restaurants. 2, restaurants, the restaurant industry is one of the largest private employers in the country, right? Huge amount of people, huge turnover. That's part of the reason why they want these robots, right? That basically, but huge turnover also means you got issues of training, bring people in there, right? But it's a huge issue. Technology. Robots, restaurants surprisingly have an incredibly high rate of technology adoption. At first hand you would say, yeah, that's surprising, but if you think about it, restaurants are quick to adopt the latest technology, faster than any other workplace we have, or just as fast, right? And it turns out they have a very diverse workforce. Most of the minority managers, they get their first break at managing in the private sector is at a restaurant. And restaurants tend to be the first job for a lot of people, right? So they actually basically provide a very unique ecosystem to understanding how humans and robots work together. If you have any questions, feel free. If it's going to, if you have any questions, let me know. If I'm going to answer it later, I'll also tell you. Here's some examples of robots that you would find in restaurants, right? There's Flippy. Has anyone heard of Flippy before? Yeah, White Castle uses Flippy a lot. That's a big thing. There is Hyper robots to make pizza. The Bella bots, or some version of it, are quite popular. People use that a lot in restaurants. You'd be surprising. There's a robot, I think, downtown here. I forgot what shop it is, right? But you would be surprised. Almost every town has at least one service robot in the restaurant. The penetration is huge. And there's, of course, the bar robot, right? A lot of restaurants that are making, a lot of robots that are making drinks. That tends to be a pretty popular application of it. So going back here, I'm asking myself, okay, robots are going to be here. They're not going anywhere. How can we create an environment where people can work with them together? And it turns out this question that I'm asking about humans working with automation and how can we make the work more meaningful, it turns out it's not a new question. It's a surprisingly old question, right? It's an old question that started off when we went from the pre-industrial age, right? So here in this age, if you were a dressmaker, you probably learned how to make a dress from your mom or your aunt. You probably made the entire dress. If you made dresses, you were a dressmaker, right? That was the pre-industrial age, and we moved to the industrial age, where basically you had corporations. And if you made dresses, you were not a dressmaker. You made one small part of that dress, right? So we went from a job that was like an identity, you had autonomy, it was who you are, to like basically being something you did to make a living, not identifying with it, being routine, boring, tedious. And so when that happens, there were a lot of people, ask the question, how can we make this work much more meaningful and enjoying? And out of that conversation came something called the job characteristics model. Has anyone ever heard that before? Anybody in the business? Pretty popular in business. So developed in the 1970s by Hackman and Oldman. Basically, the goal was to ensure that employees remained engaged and motivated and satisfied with work. The theoretical foundation, because it's important to remember that it's both a theory as well as something people use in practical applications, just to identify the key factors that lead to work that was motivating, satisfying, and engaging, right? And it provides this structured approach to look at the job and for the job design. It kind of goes like this. So they identified 5 job characteristics that promote psychological states that lead to what they consider the 4 outcomes, right? Motivation, performance, satisfaction, and turnover. I'll walk you through each of these. So the 5 job characteristics, skill variety, goes like this. To what degree the job requires a lot of skill, a variety of skill, you're going to enjoy it more. You're going to like it, right? That's a positive. Task identity, to what degree you can do a whole task instead of a part task. So let me give you an example. To what degree you're going to make an entire chair, right, as opposed to one leg. The entire chair would be high task identity. You tend to enjoy that more. To what degree you think your job is important to the organization, task significance. Right, that's positive. To what degree you have autonomy. Autonomy is to what degree you have the ability to choose how you do your job. Some sort of form of space. And feedback. To what degree you were told how you were doing your job. Right, given information. All those things were the 5 most important job characteristics. And they more or less impacted psychological states. First one was job meaningfulness. To what degree you believe your job, of course, was meaningful. That's responsibility. To what degree you felt like you had a lot of responsibility in your job. And that's knowledge of results. To what degree you knew how well you were doing in in your job, right? And those things led to an employee being more motivated, right? More energy, more engaged to perform the job better. They were more satisfied with their job, and they were less likely to quit their job. That was the job characteristic model. To become a bit more academic in detail, there were 3 overarching hypotheses. So one in particular, skill variety, task identity, task significant, all promoted job meaningfulness. And if you promote job meaningfulness, that led to employees being motivated, performance satisfaction, and reduce the chances were that they were going to quit their job. The next one here, job autonomy, led to increases in responsibility. That had the same positive impact. And then the same thing with feedback increases knowledge of results that lead to the positive outcomes. So these were the things. So it's important to know that job characteristics is a very popular model used to guide job design. So if you were going to design a new job tomorrow, you could use this to determine the outcome on the employees. If your people were unhappy with their job, you could use this to determine why and how to improve that, right? And you also have trade-offs. You can say to what degree we're going to increase productivity, but we don't want to make people too miserable, right? You can use this. I'm also hoping over and above this, that not only that we're going to apply this with people working with robots, but over and above that, that this also could be used to understand how to facilitate, how to design better work technology, right? To extend that to that realm. This also aligns, if you're in academia, there's been a lot of calls in academia asking scholars to try to view these intelligent technologies in different ways than traditional automation, and to develop, if not extend, theories that we currently have to these new contexts, right? That's been across the board in organizational behavior research, org science research, but particularly in the study of providing services, right? People are asking scholars to come up with or extend theories to find out how to keep people engaged when they're working now with AI and robotics. So that would narrow down the research question here, which is what insights can the job characteristic model provide into enhancing job quality for employees, collaborating with robots, ensuring that work remains engaging, meaningful, and satisfying, promoting, right, workplace. Now, we're going to do this in 2 studies. The first study is an exploratory study. To be fair, it was conducted during COVID, so the end of COVID, right? It's much more exploratory where we try to survey employees who are restaurant employees not working with robots to kind of see what degree they think that the job is going to change, any problems they see, right? We completed about almost 2 years ago. Then we have a second study that we're just completing the second study, much more confirmatory. They're both mixed method approaches. These are about 424 restaurant employees who are working with robots now, right? And we just completed the second wave of that, so I have some of that data. So study 1, convergent mixed method study. When I say mixed method, go ahead.
Was there overlap between the participants and study?
No, that's a good question. There's no overlap. Both of these were random samples. They're not the same organization. So that's a great question. Yeah. So basically, it's a mixed method study with quant and qualitative analysis. Am I familiar with that? We'll talk about that in a little bit more. Random sampling, established scales, so scales. So it kind of went like this. So we surveyed employees. We basically had a survey where basically they were asked questions. This is an example one question for task identity. Do you think working on a robot will either increase or decrease your opportunity to complete the work that you start, right? If they put down greatly decrease, or greatly increase, or increase, a open text box appeared and asked them to provide an example of what they meant, of how that would change, right? So they actually basically, so if they indicated they thought there would be an extreme change to their job, they would basically, they get a chance to explain exactly why they thought that was going to happen. Like, what is it about the job they thought were going to change? Give me an example. Question? No. All right? So this was how we got the quant and the qualitative data. The 220 restaurant employees, age, about what you expect. So as a gender breakdown, they worked about over 8 hours a day. So this is a good sample of restaurant employees. I won't go over details from the convergent and discriminant validity for time's sake, but trust me, it all met the requirements, if you're familiar with that. So I'll walk to a quant analysis. So for hypothesis 1, we found significant results except for skill variety and task identity. There was no evidence that led to or had a relationship with job meaningfulness, but in this case, job meaningfulness or anticipated changes in it led to anticipated changes in the outcomes. Hypothesis 2, similar here, well, different increases in job autonomy did show increases in job responsibility. They were associated. That led to more, they had an impact on motivation, but did not have an impact on performance, satisfaction, or turnover intention. Hypothesis 3, basically feedback led to knowledge of results. And of course, that was significant changes except for turnover intention. So we found some evidence that said, okay, this model could work to predict behavior, at least from a quant standpoint. Then we engaged in the actual qualitative analysis where we actually had the observation of the text coding where they actually explained examples. So we engaged in something we call bridgeting and bracketing. So when it comes to as a, call it a mixed method study, when you bridge, you're trying to find examples of evidence that supports what you find with the quantitative data, right? When you go and you bracket, you're trying to find examples to explain the opposite of that, right? To say, okay, why didn't we find this? So it was pretty, we went to a lot of analysis thematically. So for example, for the first one, we call cooperation. Comments were like, so why they thought the task significant impacted job meaningfulness and had an impact was, I would be less important because the robots would be doing all the important tasks that I would normally do. I would feel like I have a lesser role. That was the anticipation. All right. For autonomy, responsibility, and motivation, having the time to do other tasks would help me, my attitude right now, as I tend to let things slide, right? So remember, these were increases and decreases, right? So they could be positive, could be negative, right? That's what we're looking for, right? But this is why they thought it was the case. Here, feedback and knowledge result. Working beside a robot would make me more aware of how efficient the production could be, therefore causing me to self-evaluate myself. There was a lot of that. People worried about being evaluated by the employees. A robot. We also looked for evidence that was contradiction. We actually found some, right? So even though we couldn't find any quant evidence for the linked changes in skill variety and task identity, job meaningfulness, from a qualitative standpoint, we found evidence like this. Since there would be less for me to do, I can't see how meaningful my limited work would be to the company. Right? So like one of those cases where people may, from a survey standpoint, not saw a connection, but when they actually give an example, it actually came through. Another example here between job responsibility and turnover, I would feel as responsible for things that went wrong. I believe it would hinder my job and cause me to care less about the job. Right, so we see these people, and remember, these are people who have not worked with a robot, but they're anticipating the changes of what they're going to see. Right, so you're going to want to. So if we do quant and qualitative, if we weigh these equally, we do find a lot of support for the overall job characteristic model, at least in this context. Now, we went over and above for this because our second thing was to see was there any emergent themes, right? Because we wanted to see if we take this theory into context, would it applies the exact same way? Would it be different? What would be different? What would be the things they might have, right? And there were two emergent themes that popped up. So one of them was we labeled perceived usefulness with the employee. To what degree the robot is perceived to be useful with the employee, humans will retain their jobs. So humans will retain their jobs and make them better. So typically, there were people who thought the robot would help them do better in their job, and they were pretty excited about it. They thought, okay, this is great. Robot's going to help me be better than I am, right? And so comments like working a tag team way, as I'm doing one thing, the robot can do another. I'm getting drinks, the robot is taking orders. So there was a lot of comments like, hey, this is really going to help me out, man. This is really cool. Make me a better employee. On the other hand, there were comments we call perceived usefulness with the employee without the employee. To what degree the robot's going to do something without the employee, does not need the employee help, right? And so that was perceived usefulness without the employee. Comments like the robots would be taking over jobs so people would be performing less tasks. It would make me depressed like I was being outsourced or something, right? These are our second comments we call it, right? So we sort of identify these two new constructs we thought might be useful in understanding how this job characteristic model could be applied in the context of humans working with robots. And so this is sort of like we thinking about, the idea here was maybe we can extend this. Maybe we're talking about the job characteristics model when it comes to robots or autonomous systems. We have to extend that to account for these two constructs, right? So that was study one. Now, study one, limitations of that, it was anticipated changes, right? They're imagining the changes. So maybe our associations are not that reliable because people may anticipate something. And our two separate constructs may not also be valid, right? It could be basically that they're emergent in this one context, which is kind of why. So they just could, if we did it again, it could not be there, right? Which is kind of why for the second study. So the question was asked, were these the same employees? And the answer is no. And the reason why we wanted to do that, because we wanted to do a retest in a different set of employees, right? To actually see to what degree things we learned in the first study were actually real, right? So we did study two, where a confirmatory analysis where we actually want to contextualize this stuff, right, to see if it worked. So for study two, we see it more as confirmatory. We keep the same three hypotheses we got from the first study, and then we try to extend that with two more. When we talked about these two emerging themes, we think we're going to have an impact, right? Perceived usefulness with the employee will be related, and perceived usefulness without the employer will be related.
Just a quick clarification. In the study one, the PUwE and PUwoE, I don't know what you're calling them, they were emergent out of qualitative analysis. Yes. Here you're building a hypothesis that's implying you're going to now quantify these?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So the second study, we're going to quantify them. We're going to say, okay, if this is real, we're going to quantify this with some new items, some old new items, and then we're going to actually run a test with people actually. Exactly. Good question. All right. So we're going to, so let's go to the second. So the second study, online panel again. We use the similar items, except we change them. So in this study, people actually work on a robot, increase, and they can put strongly yes, agree, or disagree, right? So they were much more directional. They were, right, the positive direction. Same thing, they got the opportunity, if they put down it was going to be strongly agree or disagree, then a text box will come up with some. We use a existing construct called perceived usefulness. I'm sure you've heard this before. If you haven't, you will if you get a PhD in anything, ACI. And we created a new construct called perceived usefulness without the employee. Right? I think the new one, I think I spelled that wrong, should be, the one that's new should be usefulness without the employee. Got to go back and change that, right? So you can see similar items, but basically the idea the robot can do things without me. So basically, online survey, the analysis we've been using have been partial least squares. I didn't mention that earlier, but did it for the first study. But we also ran this second study in covariance-based structural equation model, and we got the same results. So if you the controls, 42. So here's the demographics. I want to talk about a little bit something. In this survey, the average participant has been working with a robot for at least 2 years. Right, so this is not people who have did it for a few months just to see, okay, right? They work with a robot from 5 hours on up. And of course, you want to know, okay, how mature is the technology for the organization? Well, the organization has been working with the robot for at least over roughly 3 to 4 years. So surprisingly, these people have actually been working with this robot for quite a while. Right? It's not something that just popped up, something that was new, something that was whatever, right? There's deep penetration of these robots, in the restaurant industry. They're not uncommon at all. Educational level, kind of what you would expect, mostly high school, some college, right? You can imagine. So let's talk about what they did and what the robot did. I think this is pretty interesting. So here's the breakdown of the employee's job: front desk, counter, server, groundskeeper, cook, cleaning person. And here's the jobs that the robots actually did, right? Cleaning, lawn work, front desk, food services. Yeah, sort of breakdown here, right? Well, one of the things that we're going to do in the future we haven't done, we didn't actually pair the actual data. We had that, but we didn't run analysis, right? But just to give you an idea of, go ahead.
I noticed you put things like concierge and stuff, so which could also literally be like when you go in and you just do your order online. When you were talking with the employees, when you categorize robots, they include like what was their definition? I guess.
A robot?
Yes. Because
Yeah, so we basically, we actually had pictures. So, and they had to pick which one they thought, right? So which one they were working with. So we define robot as two things. We have a definition as an autonomous system, all right, formal definition, but we also provide pictures and examples. So they have to click which picture of the robot they were working on. Yeah. So, I mean, go ahead.
I was just wondering if, following up on that, if
In the analysis, if you are taking that into account of like which type of robot they are working with.
Yeah, we didn't take it, not yet. We didn't take into account. So we're going to think about, so we didn't do robot exactly because they know, they had the picture, but they had like a type of robot, right? So we have that, right? Someone mentioned that we should try to pair the type of robot with the employee work to see if that had an impact. So maybe I think differently. If I'm a cook and I'm working with a cook robot, maybe I think differently if I'm a server working with a cook restaurant. I don't know, right? It's a good question.
Go ahead.
also to clarify for the type that they're working with, when you're asking the question, do you specifically say answer with regards to the robot you're working with or robots?
Yeah, with the robot they're working
Like
with.
specific.
Yeah. Exactly. Good question. Yeah. This is. So, I want to do that. So, hypothesis one, we found a lot more support. Turned out to be a lot more support than we did anticipate changes. In this case, we find everything is significant except for turnover intention. That was not significant. So increases in job meaningfulness had an impact on motivation, performance, satisfaction, but not turnover intention. I should also highlight, even though I'm presenting this hypothesis one at a time, we actually tested this all together. So like we did simultaneous equations, it was like one structural equation model together, but I'm just dividing up into three to make it easy. But like these numbers are basically representing, they were taken from the entire model. Right? Hypothesis two, so job responsibility. So here we find motivation, turnover attention, but no relationship, performance, and satisfaction. And here we found almost full support except for turnover intention. Yeah.
The left column here, these
So
characteristics, positive, so higher task significance is not actually higher task significance, it's higher self-reported
yes,
impact of robot on the task significance.
yes.
So if you walk this through as an example, it's saying,
So to what degree working on a robot increased your skill variety? To what degree it did, it increased your job meaningfulness. To what degree your job meaningfulness was increased. To what degree so was your motivation.
and then to ask the question, like, and now imagine I'm error busting out sort of at the beginning of this, does robot positively or negatively impact task significance, skill variety, and task identity?
No.
Like, do we know from this data?
So yeah, so we do have this. Yes. So actually, I'm not sure if I actually spent. Yeah, we had that. So we have to what degree they think it increased or decreased. Well, no, increase. So we can say one direction. To what degree they agree that it did or did not. Yes.
Do you have the descriptive statistics about overall and how much people felt like it increased?
Yeah, we do have that. I don't have this presentation, but I could definitely. I think about it. Yeah, I could do that.
I wonder if, like, at some point there's sort of like a hedonistic adaptation thing where it just sort of feels like a wash to them.
So here's the problem with the study. So let me give you one of the problems with the study, the limitation. It's a sample bias, right? So I'm thinking about this, right? So basically everybody who filled out this survey are people who self-selected to work with robots, right? So basically if there was somebody who says, I'm not working on a robot, screw you, they're not going to be in this area. So anybody in the first study who theoretically said, I'm not, I'm balking, I'm leaving this, well, they're not going to be here. So there's some self-selection, can't get away with that. But I have that data. I can actually look at that. I didn't think about that. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. So now we talk about some things that we were surprising or we didn't find evidence for. I'm going to start off with hypothesis two because this is interesting in some ways, right? I think it's interesting. So according to the theory of job characteristic model, so basically, increases in job autonomy lead to increases in job responsibility. That should decrease the chances of you quitting your job. But in this case, it actually increases the chance of you quitting your job. Right? Does that make sense? Now, if you look at the actual additional, you see why, right? You see why, right? So I want to leave because I don't want to be in charge of robots, right? It raises a degree of responsibility due to perform. So basically, working with robots, you basically, part of your job is to do what? To take care of the robot, right? So increasing the job responsibility isn't necessarily a good thing. Does that make sense? Huh? So that was why we kind of surprised why that was flipped, but I guess it makes sense if we dig deeper. So here's something here. So why didn't job responsibility increase performance and satisfaction? We're kind of not sure here. We're still going through the data. We think maybe it's disassociating the robot's work from yours. So we get comments like the main impact of job performance depends on how well the robot is integrated into workflow. That's one thing. Then there was another one like robots help me with smaller tasks to help me be productive. A robot cannot affect my job performance regardless if I am a hard worker with or without a robot. Same thing with satisfaction. Like something like the reaction from the customers are what make us satisfied with our jobs, not the robot itself. So I don't know. So I don't know what you call that. We call it maybe disassociation with the robot. We don't know. But the idea is the robot is doing something, but it's not really increasing my performance. They don't value the labor of the robot. Does that make sense?
Other kind of testing, like personality or psychological, like state trait anxiety, or I don't know, any kind of.
So we have control variables of the attitude toward a robot in general.
But you don't have like, I don't know, the big five personality.
No, it's fun.
Because to me it feels like, for example, if I'm an extroverted person, I want to interact with the customers. And if I'm introverted, then maybe I'm happier to have a robot that will take the orders or something.
Maybe, but if you were introverted, you probably wouldn't have a job at a restaurant, right?
I don't know.
Maybe. It's a good point. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Behind the counter, yeah. No, it could be. I mean, we have like traits related to the robot, but not, I don't know, big five. No, I don't think we know. That's a good point. Yeah, I think it's a good point. Yeah, I like that, yeah. So let's go to the second one here. So we didn't find any impact on these things in turnover, intention. Before I give you the 4 buckets of why that's the case, do you want to guess why? Anybody have any reason why these things don't have an impact on turnover intention? Okay, go ahead.
I think it also depends on like where you are. So like for example, this is in like the restaurant business.
Yeah.
And so you have like restaurant business where it's like where you are working is just so high like stress and stuff that like it may not really even like that's not the main reason that they're leaving in the first place. Like would impact turnover.
Okay.
I don't know necessarily if this is one of the high stress like what is it called, fast food or a high-end type thing in that nature. And there's also typically people who are working within servers and stuff like that, at least for the high stress situations, don't really have, I don't know. I don't know.
No, let's look at it. No problem. That's good. There we go. The employees love their job regardless of the robot. They don't really care. They don't really care. Right? They love what they're doing. Robot or not, I love my job, and no robot is going to take that away from me. I love their job. Right? And so, I mean, there are people here, they love their job no matter what, right? Here's the other one. Perceive positive embracing. Some people actually see, hey, this robot stuff is coming. We got to embrace this. Right? You're like, this is, it's basically, it's here, and it's here everywhere, right? Robots, AI are coming up everywhere, and so we got to learn to live with it, right? And there's positive impacts there, right? Here, depends on the task performed by the robot. This is where I think we've got to dig a little deeper into, right? So I think this is implying the robot is a threat to take jobs. I think we're generations away from people wanting to interact with a front-facing robot, right? So some people saw their value as front-facing with the customer, and the robot was never going to take that away, right? No one's going to want to talk to a robot when it comes to those things. Working on a robot does not change my desire. So here's the fourth one we found. Other factors drive turnover, right? I mean, I thought someone was going to get that. Maybe you work in a restaurant, you need the money. What do you care? Robot or not, right? I wouldn't. It doesn't. Money is what persuaded me to take my abilities elsewhere, right? Remember, this is the industry that has high turnover. So people may be working there part-time or they're working there full-time for a temporary situation. They got a robot, so who cares? They got a robot, I'll just deal with it. Right? Does that make sense? So the turnover, so these things were actually tied to. So then we actually looked at these new constructs and found that perceived usefulness with the robot impacts all of the job characteristics. Perceived usefulness. So to be honest, when we really thought about perceived usefulness without the employer, we thought they would have negative impacts. Remember, because the last one, it seemed like people were thinking the robot was going to help them or hurt them, like cooperation or competition. Turns out it has largely positive impacts. It didn't have any impact on task identity, and we dug deeper in it. And we think that because the work was loosely coupled, right? They allow me to have spend as much time as I want to in scheduling. With that time, I can complete my work more readily and in a timely manner. So that's why it didn't really happen. Yeah. Go further here. Look at the impact of these same two things on psychological states. Perceived usefulness with the employee, heavily impactful, right? Without impactful except for job responsibility, and you can read some of the comments here. Once again, we label this loosely coupled with the work. So the robot is helping me, but not intensely, right? It's doing this thing over here, and I'm doing my thing over here, right? And we saw this same thing here. Now here's so same thing here with the non-significant results, but here's the caveat here. Turns out perceived usefulness with the employee reduces my turnover intention. Perceived usefulness without the employee actually increases turnover intention. So even though the robot is working without me quite well, I'm happy with it in many ways. It increases my intention of leaving this job. All right? Does that make sense? So it's good. I mean, it's working, but I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is not going to work out for me in the long run. All right? Does that make sense?
Can you remind me what the survey question was for these again?
Okay, I can do better than that. We can go back and, I think I can go back and show you exactly what they were. So this one should be without, I left a typo, it should be.
So there's sort of like, in some sense, you could orthogonalize, is it useful and successful in its task from the sort of, am I involved or not, like the coupling. I'm wondering how much of the positive loadings you saw could have been kept loading on the usefulness axis rather than the with or without it's like if the robot's breaking all the time, it's it doesn't matter whether it's with or without me. It's just gonna piss me off.
But then I would say it would be low on both ends. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm in my head the story of why you have positive coefficients going both directions is I think that it may be that there's a lot of what this is capturing is the robot actually accomplishing what it's supposed to?
Yeah, I think you are, but the question is it doing it with me or not, right? So we actually did factor analysis and anything load on different constructs. Mm-hmm. So this is a well-established, not in the context of robots, but in the context of technology, perceived usefulness is pretty well established. These are items that were just made for this second study, brand new, right? And we thought for sure they would cross-load. They don't cross-load. Right, but I think you're right in that sense. I don't know if so. I mean, it makes some sense that basically, this thing works really well. It almost works too well. Like this thing doesn't need me, and people are thinking, well, maybe I might want to get another job someplace else in the long run. I mean, this is right. This is So so that's a good point. I think we basically thought we would get two dimensions on the same construct. Or something that we thought this would be very bad. We really embodied a cooperation versus competition, a substitute versus a complement relationship. That when people view the robot as a complement, they'd be all for it. When they viewed it as a substitute, they would be against it. That's what we thought, and that's what we kind of thought in the first study. We saw in the first study, but we didn't see this in the second study. Right? Except for turnover intention. So JCM model robots. So we found it applies. We did find something different when it comes to increase in autonomy, increase in turnover intention, job meaningfulness. So we did find some relationship didn't hold up. We thought it would depend on if the work was loosely coupled or not. Still trying to figure out why job responsibility was not related to performance and satisfaction. This is early. We're just finished collecting this data recently. And we have a second wave of this data that we also are going through, so this is still we're working through this. We also feel like, from a theoretical standpoint, pretty academic standpoint, that you might want to extend the job characteristic model when people are working with autonomous systems to look at perceived usefulness with and without the employee, because they tend to both provide additional explainability over the existing model. Now, where should you put it in a model? We don't know yet. We're actually running some analysis to determine where it should go. Should it go before the characteristic? Should it go at so we're trying to work through that, right? But we think this is important to extend the model when people are working with technology that we consider to be an autonomous system. We also think they have both different impacts on turnover intention, so that's also interesting. Here's some design applications. I as someone who've left the business school and went to the ACM community, I used to get smashed. I say, "There's no design applications. Why are you here?" So I always got like whiplash. Got to put some design applications in my presentation. So here we go, and I think they're useful. So one, design robots to handle routine tasks, right? Freeing humans for more varied responsibility while retaining control over important decisions. That seems to be something you might want to keep in mind. Two, ensure robots complete discrete identifiable service portions, allowing humans to see their contributions clearly. Right? So think about designing robots, not just as designing interfaces, but designing the work the robot actually does. I think oftentimes HCI, we're too inundated, too focused on the technology, not the context, not the fact that the work has to be redesigned with the technology, right? Allow customers to rate the experience with humans and robots separately. This is a big thing. People got really pissed. They feel like people get money from tips. How do you get tips? You get great service. What if a robot screws up your service? They don't like that. That's a big complaint. They want basically to have their job performance to a degree separated from the performance of the robot. Right? They want to know that they do a good job. Right? Design robots to support rather than overshadow humans' roles by emphasizing the human touch in the customer service. So one of the things you can do is to try to have the robot do a lot of the things in between the actual customer, like have the employee, the one that said hello, to the customer, not the robot. Robot should not be saying hello. Right? The robot can do a lot of things in between, but when it comes to that human touch, you want the person out in front. Right? So don't try to substitute that human touch for a robot. That doesn't help anyone, especially the employees, because they get really pissed off about that. They get pissed off because they think it reduces their performance, but they get pissed off because they think that you believe they can be replaced by a robot. That was a big problem. They feel demeaned. That basically, if the robot can do exactly what they can do, then somehow they themselves are not human. They're less than, and their work is less than. Right? Another thing is, from an interface standpoint, this is interesting. I'm not sure I'm going to. So, design robot interfaces that offer multiple control options, allowing staff to choose their preferred interaction method, right? And I was going to go further and say some employees said they want to be able to adjust the autonomy level in the robot to determine what it can do and what it cannot do, right? To customize them. So, is that a good idea? So, on one hand, from a design standpoint, my iSchool hat says yes. Give the employees the ability to customize a robot to, if someone comes in the shift and they don't like the robot doing X, they can adjust it, right? On the other hand, my business school hat says that's crazy. That's crazy, right? You want to standardize the process. You got employees come in, you got a high rate of turnover. You want to make everything standardized. You want to train them to one thing. You want them touching it. Right? So that's why I don't know. I mean, so recommendation, I don't know. I mean, from a purely HCI standpoint, you would empower the employees, give them the choices. From an organizational standpoint, I can see it being a nightmare for a manager. So that's all I have. Any questions? If you got good eyesight, you can see the reference. I got, it's like I'm academic, so I got to have references, but there you go. So thank you.
Oh yeah, super interesting talk. Thank you so much. I have a question about how did the way people interact and perceive robots change over time? And also, if there are ways for like employers to kind of impact the ways the employee interact or like kind of perceive robots, so that they tend to collaborate more, but like less impacted by robots. Like,
So the first question, we didn't look at time. We can't do that with this study. So we sort of lose that. So we get like this snapshot. So that's something that we don't do. The second question was
ways for employees kind of impact employer to impact their employees so they collaborate better.
yeah. So here's the problem. So that's a great question. So the question is, any way that you can design so that humans can collaborate better with robots? I get asked this question a lot. It's a problematic question because the answer is easy. Do you know what the answer is? Anybody want to guess what the answer is?
How to collaborate better with robots?
Yeah, to encourage humans to collaborate better with robots, to collaborate more with robots. Oh, you make them, go ahead.
Maybe define some incentive.
Could be incentive. I'll tell you one further. You make the robot more social. You make it a buddy. You make it a friend. All right, you make it, well, it encourages people to collaborate with it, more with it.
Encourages.
Yeah. I mean, collaborate better. I think so. To collaborate better, I would say it's a work design. So in that standpoint from collaboration, I would say they're either collaborating with it or they're not. Because the work design should determine the collaboration, I would think. Right? You got a question on that topic?
Or no, it's a,
No.
just on this.
You want to follow up? No. Okay.
Oh no.
It seems like if Microsoft Word was going to start chatting with me every time I opened it.
I don't know that I can collaborate. But
Well, maybe not Microsoft Word, right? Although I use ChatGPT, it answers pretty well. Siri, yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe. I mean, a lot of technology, for example. So here we go. Let me push back on this. My theme is this: people take the job for the money, but they come back to see their friends. A lot of our social life revolves around work. To what degree you just replaced a coworker with a robot? The answer to that tends to be to make that robot their friend. I'm not saying it's a good thing. There are people who say that's unethical. There's a huge conversation now on social robots that people like Ben Snyderman, who are saying it's fundamentally unethical to design robots to encourage people to humanize them and to be friends with them. They said basically it's deception, it's misleading, because a robot is a thing, it's not your friend. So if you had a coworker, I might say, hey, you know what, my boss sucks, right? But that robot is recording everything you said, and your boss is in the whole tape, right? So that basically we shouldn't be encouraging people to build emotional bonds with artificial things. But if you want to encourage people to be more, if you want to encourage people to enjoy their interactions more, that's what you do.
I think it's important for employees to understand the employer objective of using robots and employ together. If the purpose is to increase efficiency and reduce cost, they need to understand that this increase in efficiency doesn't necessarily mean replace them in the workforce, right? And I think if they have share in this cost reduction, I mean, they can earn more instead of be concerned of losing their job. They'd be more, I'm thinking about some managerial business or human resource aspect of the issue.
So that was interesting. That was a question. So she's saying that basically if the people would get more money for because the robot is more efficient, right? If they were sharing that, could be. Yeah. I think one of the things is that there's a high turnover. So people are going to leave anyway. So you think, why am I going to accommodate this employee if they're going to leave anyway? Maybe I want to get more robots. I don't know.
I have kind of an unrelated question. I was wondering with the robot that is sort of taking on, I'm forgetting the condition on the right. How do you? Basically, what I was thinking is maybe first adopters of these technologies that are taking portions of the human job and are kind of tightly coupled. Maybe those employers are also less personal. They have built less. I don't know. I guess how do you in this second study, how do you control for employers that are bad and are basically trying they're just not very good employers that are trying to slowly phase out their employees, you know?
Yeah, I don't can't control for that. It's a good point. I think this is a great conversation because we had a conversation a while back at a workshop I was in where we wanted to question as ACI people, should we be designing technology to take people's job and blah blah blah. Here's the problem. The economic justification for the innovation of technology, it's always been to reduce costs. I mean, people say, oh no, it'll make things better. We get more sales. Look, I'll give you an example. For every $1 you increase in sales, do you know how much you get to keep? Like 10 cents, right? Maybe 15 cents. For every $1 you cut costs, do you know how much you get to keep? $1. So you can sell. So if you can do it with the $1 or the increase in sales that might happen, that go from $1, right? So in reality is the biggest driving cost of automation like this is the biggest incentive is to reduce costs. And like I mentioned before earlier, in the restaurant industry, the labor costs are like 30 to 50%. So I mean.
It's because I'm like thinking if you're
And people don't want to like leave you. But I'm just like, how can we even test for that, right? Because if someone has already adopted this, then maybe that, like, irrespective of it's more about the attitude that the employer has and like makes the employees feel less valued in general.
Well, but remember, we know the restaurant industry has a 70% turnover rate, right? So for every 10 people you hire, 7 will leave. And why? Because you're in college, you got a part-time job. You're not looking to stay there, right? So what are they going to do? They want to protect themselves from that turnover. I mean, once again, this is my business school hat on, so maybe I'm.
For this specific study, did you test for like different types of restaurants? Like somebody.
Yeah, we have that data. We have that. We have different types of restaurants, different sizes of restaurants. We didn't see any difference.
There was no difference between, like, for example, like a head chef who like cooks very fancy.
So that's okay. So that's good. Yeah. So we haven't done that. So that goes back to the position, right? So maybe if you're a head chef and your attitude toward the robot that you work with in the kitchen may be different than you working with a server robot, right? And so yeah, we have that data, but we haven't checked that yet. It's a good point.
I'm curious.
What opportunity you have between study 1 and study 2 is to look at people's sort of imaginaries of AI versus the actual experience of working on AI. Because like your picture, like if I sit here and you open this talk, be like, picture AI in a restaurant, it would be like, cool robots, serves it's like bonjour, exactly. And you're like, serving me. And then, but for these people, it's like it's my dishwasher, right? And I'm wondering if that is informing like their experiences. What did it teach us about
That future, like,
So here's what we said. At the beginning, we thought, okay, look, in the beginning, we said, study 1, people thought this idea of the robot working, being good without them was bad, all bad. Turned out it was really good, right? And we thought that could tell us something, right? People imagined there's something happening. But then we were reminded of what we said earlier, was that these are like, the people in the second study probably self-selected to work with these robots.
so this is optimistic, if anything.
Yeah, this is probably like a sample. So these are not like the people, the first sample where they were, so it could very, so if we assume the same set of people randomly migrated over to study 2, yes. But if we assume that it's going to be a different sample, because the people from study 1 said, I'm not working at that restaurant with that robot, then we're screwed.
And how would in
this sort of informed style literature, how do you account for opinions toward technology in the face of displacement? So what I mean here is, you ask the people who are working with robots, and they're like, yeah, it's pretty good. Like, I like having a dishwasher machine at home, right? But then job displacement happens, so there's probably a bunch of people who are quite unhappy about the robot because they lost their job, but you're not able to even survey those individuals.
Exactly. So here's the problem. So here's the issue with that bigger issue. I get asked all the time about job loss. The problem with job loss and automation is this. If someone opens up a plant tomorrow and they hire 100 employees, right, what you don't know is they typically would have hired 500 employees. right? You don't know that, right? Those jobs are gone, they're invisible. They're not like people didn't get laid off that day, right? So it's sort of like here, it's not quite sure if anyone saw those jobs disappear. Like they could have not hired as many people, right? Right, exactly. And so you don't see that. So yeah, so I mean, we can account for some of that, but I'm afraid the people who would have felt that way, I mean, some of that's here, but I don't know how much we can speak to.
Any sort of methodological tricks you can pull because of the high turnover rates there? Like, essentially because there's always constant, I wonder if you can now get before or after kind of.
Yeah, we could do that. I think we can do it. We can run a separate study. I think it would be better if we had an organization, fixed organization we can look at. Yeah, we could. But that goes back to what someone mentioned over time, right? So it'd be interesting to see if people had these negative attitudes and then over time it changed. We know the demographics are not unusual. Like the actual demographics on the second study mimic the demographics in the first study. So they're not they're not entirely different set of people from that standpoint.
Thanks all.